ऑडिबल नहीं है.
Yes,
Yes,
actually audible.
sir. Okay, sir. So, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the capacity building program, the 1 week long capacity building program on jurisprudence and legal theory. Today is the sixth day, and we are here with a session on teaching and research in jurisprudence. It is my esteemed honor to welcome Professor Dr. R.K. Murali, sir, Professor of Law, Faculty of Law, BHU, Varanasi. Sir is an accomplished academician and legal scholar, and he holds a degree of BSc, LLB, LLM, and PhD in law. And he has over 3 decades of teaching experience. He started way back in 1997. So, without further ado, I will hand over the stage to Sir. Over to you, Sir.
Should I start? Oh,
Yes, sir, please. I won't take your any more time.
okay, okay, sure. So I think that because so far as this particular, because I thought that you will introduce the other thing. So I was just thinking that there will be some other formalities to be complied with. Okay. See,
No,
when
sir,
the,
we can
the
go ahead.
topic which of course that is given to me is that teaching and research in jurisprudence. So first of all, I would focus on the aspects of teaching of jurisprudence, and then of course I would move towards the research, how the research must be conducted in jurisprudence. So when first of all I want to tell you, teach you, it means when I entered the first year class and when I want to teach jurisprudence to the students who have just joined the law course. Now the first important thing would be that, see, this is a journey. That is what I want to tell you all. The journey starts like this. In the beginning, we thought that law is a branch of morality. We thought law is a branch of justice. And we thought that law and morality are almost synonymous. That means we thought that we can, what is moral, only that can be law. And we thought that law can never be unjust. And because that time we understood that justice was the criteria to identify law. And we thought that law, of course, requires justice. Justice is a very integral component of law. But then, because first of all, I will tell you as to what is going to be the broad outlines of my lecture. So, once I make you understand the broad outlines of my lecture, then of course I shall start going into the details. The first important point that I want to emphasize here is that in the beginning, of course, law was connected with the higher things, and law was understood to be a branch of morality, a branch of justice. Now, when Thomas Hobbes, he liberated law from morality, he liberated law from justice. And Thomas Hobbes, he said that law is, of course, based on law and order. That means he said order is more important than justice. That means, so far as this particular observation of Thomas Hobbes is concerned, that's such an important observation, wherein, of course, today we understand that law, because as we go down the path, now when we go further down the path, when Bentham and Austin comes, now they, of course, very openly proclaim that law can also be immoral. And they also said that justice is not the criteria to identify law. And they said even unjust law can be law. But actually, Thomas Hobbes, he of course converted the higher natural law into the natural rights. That means, so far as Thomas Hobbes is concerned, he discarded the higher form of natural law and he embraced the lower form of natural law, which we today know as, no, which we today call as natural rights. So, why Thomas Hobbes had no respect means you can say that why Thomas Hobbes was so much against the higher law? Because he thought the higher law is the root of all the problems. And people, in the name of higher law, they were questioning the existing authority. And the higher law is always a particular criteria on the basis of which the present laws are judged. For example, today your king makes a particular law and you say it is not law because it is not in accordance with the standards of the higher law. So Thomas Hobbes thought that no one exactly knows what is that higher law. But everyone wants to know what is the higher law, and the higher law is the particular criteria on the basis of which you will decide whether the law made by the humans it can be called as law or not. And he thought this higher law, of course, is a priori. And the human law, if you say that it should be in accordance with a particular standard or criteria, and the human law which is not in accordance with the standards of the higher moral law, of course, it cannot be called as a law at all. And that, of course, was giving rise to insecurity in the society. And people were always questioning the existing law in the name of the higher law. So that, of course, went on for a very long time. And Thomas Hobbes, he thought that the time has come when we should understand that what exactly is the role of the higher law, and why should we, of course, discard the higher form of natural law, and why, of course, we should be more, in a way, empirical in our approach. Now, that is the starting point, in my opinion, wherein, of course, we understand. Because Thomas Hobbes also said that morality cannot be the criteria to identify law. And he said nature is only power. Nature, of course, knows no law. Nature knows no justice. Nature knows no society. So he understood that nature is only power. If nature is only power, then he thought that we human beings must also acquire power. Because he thought that power, of course, is very important. Because when nature is power, we human beings must also acquire power to neutralize the power of the nature. So Thomas Hobbes thought, because until Thomas Hobbes came, it was man in accordance with nature. But since that time of Thomas Hobbes, he said it is man against nature. Now, man in accordance with nature and man against nature. Now, when man challenged nature, when man said that I defy, what means he said I am not subordinate to nature. I don't prostrate before nature. I will explore the nature. Nature is something where I can, of course, I can conduct investigations and I can unravel the mysteries of nature. And that is where the modernity has started. Now, Thomas Hobbes, there he of course says that the duties are not the basis of justice. He displaced duties as the basis of justice and he replaced the duties with rights. So, since that time, rights became the basis of justice. Let me explain that. Because when Thomas Hobbes came, the theory of Aristotle was very popular. The theory of St. Thomas Aquinas was very popular. St. Thomas Aquinas and Aristotle, they gave a teleological view of human nature. Now, what is the teleological view of human nature? They said that everything in life has a purpose, and we are all driven by a particular purpose. Every particular entity, whether it is animate or inanimate, of course, they are guided by a particular purpose. And the purpose, of course, is so important to understand what is the purpose of our existence. And then that is the higher thing. So, Thomas Aquinas and Aristotle, they said that we have a duty to realize our purpose. And that purpose, of course, can be understood through the concept of duties. So, we should train our minds and we should, of course, inculcate good qualities like virtue, wisdom, and then generosity. And then, so these are the higher intangible goods. So they were not talking about the materialistic goods, they were talking about the intangible goods like virtue, wisdom, salvation, temperament. So they thought that we should cultivate good qualities. And these good qualities, of course, will take us towards realizing our basic purpose for which we have come onto this great planet, which is known as the Earth. Now, here, Thomas Hobbes, he did not appreciate the teleological view of human nature. Instead, he took the causal and empirical view of human nature. So, when Thomas Hobbes took the causal and empirical view of human nature, Thomas Hobbes famously said that man by nature is nasty, man by nature is dirty, man by nature is only, of course, he can think only about himself. And then he, of course, has a quarrelsome nature. And his life is very short lived. That means in nature, because there is no law. And in nature, there is no justice. Nature is only power. Because of that, only the strong people can survive in nature. So Thomas Hobbes says that, see here, one very interesting observation I want to make. Am I audible? Can I get any response from the other side?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Okay, okay, that's good. See, so far as this particular observation is concerned, what I want to tell you here is that when we want to distinguish between law of nature and natural law, now what is law of nature? Law of nature is based on science, that is purely empirical. Like, for example, when we talk about law of nature, animals and human beings both, of course, have obey the laws of nature. What is the law of nature? It is based on science. Now, I require food because I am a human being. That is, of course, the law of nature. I require water because I am a human being. Now, animals also want water. Animals also want food. And animals do sex. Of course, they do it unknowingly. Human beings also do sex. That means these are common things which we share with animals. Then what makes us distinct from animals? So here we understood that we human beings, apart from having law of nature which is based on science, we also have a natural law. And that natural law is normative. It is not empirical. This natural law is based on an ought proposition. It tells us how we ought to conduct ourselves. Because this natural law, which is inherent within us, it will tell us what is right and what is wrong. So we, of course, are born with the understanding of what is right and what is wrong. We need not be told as to what is right and what is wrong. That is what makes us distinct from animals. So Thomas Hobbes said that we human beings, because we of course have that natural law, of course we also have the law of nature. But we are not only objects of science. We are not only objects of nature. We also have a particular, because this particular understanding wherein we are saying that we are normative. We understand what is right and what is wrong. And that is what makes us distinct from animals. So Thomas Hobbes questioned that. Thomas Hobbes, he says that we human beings, we are also like animals. We are not different from animals because we are more driven by passions and desires. We are less driven by reason. We have only a modicum of reason. So Thomas Hobbes, because you see, when the onslaught was made on the higher law, when the higher law was attacked, Thomas Hobbes, of course, attacked the higher law. And as I told you earlier, he converted the higher natural law into the lower natural rights. And what he is saying, he discarded the teleological view of human nature and he took the causal and empirical view of human nature. Now, when you look at David Hume, he also attacked the higher law. Now, David Hume said that reason is, of course, a slave to your passions and desires. And when we as we go down the road, when we look at Bentham, Bentham said that your reason is only an instrumental reason. Reason is not intrinsic. Reason is only a means to an end. Your desires and passions, they tell you what is the end. Reason will only tell you what is the meaning, what is the means through which you achieve that particular end which is set by your desires and passions. So even Thomas Hobbes said that your reason is only a scout for your desires. That means what I am trying to tell you is that the reason, which was of course enjoying a high priority and which was up the ladder, now that was brought down. And now you understand that the human beings, who of course are supposed to have been born with reason, now Thomas Hobbes is saying that no, human beings have only a modicum of reason and they are more driven by passions and desires. So that is where I would tell you that Thomas Hobbes, see, this is my observation, Thomas Hobbes converted the natural law into law of nature. That means we thought that we had the higher things within us. We thought we were born with a morality inside us. We understood that we know what is right and what is wrong inherently. But Thomas Hobbes said that we don't understand what is right and what is wrong inherently. We should be told as to what is right and what is wrong. So Thomas Hobbes said that law is external to us. This is a very important sentence. He said law is something which is external to us. It is not something which is within us as it was observed by the earlier natural law philosophers. So Thomas Hobbes, he is questioning that. He is saying that we human beings, we are not distinct from animals. We of course are driven by passions. We are driven by passions and desires. We have only a modicum of reason. Our nature is very selfish. Our nature is very dirty. Our nature is very quarrelsome. And life in nature is very short-lived. So Thomas Hobbes says that when nature is so bad, we have to escape from nature. And how do we escape from nature? Because we have a modicum of reason. That reason will enable us to form a social contract through which, of course, we create a power which is known as the state. The state, of course, is, of course, which enjoys power. So the law is now being identified through the power. So Thomas Hobbes says that the state will make the law. Now suppose you are, because you say Thomas Hobbes, of course, is a natural law jurist. So he, of course, believes in certain natural law things also. But when you understand that the state is created, and you say that it is the state that gives you law and order, and the law did not exist prior to the existence of the state. Law is only the creation of the state. Law is the byproduct of the state. So what I mean to tell you here is that Thomas Hobbes, he of course took us from moral to political. From moral to political. What does it mean? He made law political. He wanted you to identify law through the state. But earlier, we were identifying law through the morality, through ethics. So we were identifying morality was the criteria to identify the law. Ethics was the criteria to identify the law. But Thomas Hobbes said that the solution to moral dilemma is political. So he took us from moral to political. And the political is, of course, the state. And the state will tell you now what is right and what is wrong because you don't inherently understand what is right and what is wrong. So Thomas Hobbes said that because he was the precursor to legal positivism. Though, of course, he is not a positivist himself, but he was the precursor to legal positivism because he, of course, laid the foundations of positivism, wherein, of course, he said that it is the power that, of course, determines what is right and what is wrong. And the reason is only subordinate to power. Now, the reason becomes subordinate to power. So when Austin Bentham come, they identify law with power and they identify law with state. And they say that the state defines what is the law. And the state, of course, tells us what is right and what is wrong. And that is where positivism starts in the real sense. Law is a human creation. And so Austin and Bentham, they do not, of course, appreciate the a priori things. A priori things mean the higher things. Because Thomas Hobbes already liberated law from morality. He already liberated law from justice. And he said law is, of course, based on order. He said order is more important than justice. So when he said order is more important than justice, law, of course, became political. And when law became political, then, of course, law became the command of the sovereign. So when law became the command of the sovereign, Thomas Hobbes, of course, Austin and Bentham, they wanted to understand law as an empirical science. Now, what is this empirical science? Why Austin and Bentham are so particular to understand law as an empirical science? Because Austin and Bentham thought that it is the power that makes law. It is the power which tells you what is moral and immoral. So, Austin and Bentham thought that because you see, when you subject the law to moral scrutiny, when you subject the law, because when you want to understand that the political power must be subjected to moral scrutiny, that was the higher law, wherein the political power was subordinated to the moral authority. The political power is subordinate to the ethical authority. But when Thomas Hobbes said that the power, of course, defines what is right and what is wrong, because what is right and what is wrong is not within you, it is something which is without you, it is external to you. So law is something which is not within you, law is external to you. So the entire positivism is based on the understanding that the law is, of course, Hart is an exception, he is a soft positivist. But so far as Austin and Bentham are concerned, they thought that the law comes from the state, and the state, of course, is sovereign because the people habitually obey a particular authority. Habitual obedience makes you the sovereign. That is what Austin said. Now, what I mean to tell you here is that so you want to make law an empirical science. And why are you trying to make law an empirical science? Because you said morality is not the criteria to identify law. There are certain formal criteria to identify the law. And if any particular custom or the judge-made law, for example, when we talk about the custom, now Austin Bentham will say the custom is not law by itself. The custom has to pass through the formal criteria, because they said that every particular country has certain formal criteria to identify the law, and these formal criteria they will tell you how the law must be identified. And these are also known as the formal sources of law. For example, in India, we have the legislature, the judiciary, the executive. So, whatever is, of course, said by the legislature, because the law is deliberately made through the legislature. And once the law is so deliberately made, Because it is deliberately made, it is called as legislation. And it is a human creation. The law today is a human creation. You sit in the parliament and you think over, you reflect over, you debate, you discuss, you have a dialogue with others, and then you make the law. So that law is a human creation, it is deliberately made. Now, suppose I tell you that, suppose the legislature accepted immoral things as law. It is the law. Because the criteria today is not morality to identify the law. The criteria is whether the particular material passes through the formal criteria or not. If the moral criteria does not follow through the formal criteria, the moral criteria is not law, though it may be moral, but it is not law. Because even the morality, even the moral things, they should be filtered through the formal criteria. And it is the formal criteria that, of course, is important to say whether it is law or not. So that way, suppose the Supreme Court has given a judgment, and you say the Supreme Court judgment is immoral because you think, according to your standard of morality, it is immoral. Or maybe most of the people agree with you that the interpretation done by the Supreme Court is immoral. So Austin and Bentham will tell you that it is the law, though it is immoral, because Supreme Court is the formal authority to interpret the law and have the authority. They have the legal authority. So Austin and Bentham, what they tried to do, they wanted to separate from law from morals, because they thought this morals that cannot be the criteria to identify the law. They thought law, morality, and justice, these are the higher things. And now today the law has become political. So here what I want to tell you is that, see, Austin and Bentham, they of course devoted their maximum time to understand what is the difference between legal right and moral right. Because before they came, it was understood that legal rights are only a variety of moral rights. And before Austin and Bentham came, legal obligation was only understood as a variety of moral obligation. So morality is the fundamental thing. It is the root. And law is only an offshoot of morality, because everything must be explained through morality. So what is a legal right? People used to say it is only a variety of moral right. What is a legal obligation? It is only a variety of moral obligation. So this type of things Austin and Bentham attack. And what they wanted to prove, they wanted to tell you very clearly that what is morally right, it need not be legally right. What is morally right can be legally wrong. And what is morally wrong can be legally right. Because law and morality are two distinct branches of learning. Law and morality are not, of course, the one particular understanding. Morality is one subject, law is another subject. So let us not try to understand that law can be identified through morality. They said law is identified through certain formal criteria. Let me give an example. Because Austin and Bentham wanted to make law an empirical science. So how did they succeed? Because empirical sciences are based on facts, and they're also known as factual sciences. They are known as descriptive sciences. So how Austin and Bentham endeavored to make law an empirical science? Now let me tell you that. For example, I am seated in my chair right now, and I am giving you the lecture. Now I am the sovereign because I am sitting in the chair. Now how do you know I am the sovereign? Because you habitually obey me. That habitual obedience is a factual thing. That means, because you habitually obey me, I am the sovereign. And whatever I say, because I command you, law is the command of the sovereign. Now I command you. Now whether the command is a good command or a bad command, that is not material, according to Austin and Bentham. Whether it's a command or not, a factual thing. Suppose you go to a normative question, only good commands can be law. That means now you are mistaken. Austin and Bentham said you don't require good commands to make it a law. Even bad commands are as much a law as good commands are. Because good and bad, these are normative things. And law is a factual science. And a factual science is what? Factual science, suppose you go to physics department or chemistry department, they will tell you what are the factual things. But they are not concerned about the goodness or the badness of the inventions. So they only tell you what are the facts. So that is what makes them empirical. Now, Austin and Bentham wanted to use the same method which is used in the natural sciences to understand law. So they want to understand law as an empirical science. The same method which is applied in the natural sciences, they wanted to apply in law and to understand law through empirical methods. So the thing is what the command, whether it's a good command or a bad command, it doesn't matter at all. It should be a command. And why am I sovereign? Because I am getting habitual obedience. Now, why you obey me? You may obey me because of fear. You may obey me because of respect. You may obey me because of a number of reasons. Austin and Bentham, they said we are not concerned with that. Whether you obey or not, why you obey, that is not our inquiry. Because science is not concerned with all these things, whether you obey or not, habitual obedience. So now, one more important thing is what? That is what distinguishes Hart, Austin and Bentham on one side and Hobbes on the other side. I told you, Hobbes was the precursor to legal positivism. And Hobbes, he studied in the natural law, though he was the precursor to legal positivism. Now, what distinguishes the approach of Hobbes from Austin and Bentham? According to Austin and Bentham, law is a social fact. Law is a social fact. It should be understood factually. Now I am seated in the chair. Now I say I am the sovereign because you give me habitual obedience. But someone objects by saying that, of course, sir, you are getting habitual obedience. But that doesn't make you sovereign. Because, sir, you killed your father, you killed your mother, you became the sovereign through immoral methods. Actually, you are not entitled to sit in the throne because your father and mother, they are alive. And your father must continue to sit in the throne. But then you murdered your father. You are a very immoral man. But Bentham and Austin will tell you whether I became the sovereign through moral method or immoral method, that is not important. Because I am seated in the chair. I am the sovereign. So Bentham and Austin said what is the law is one question. What ought to be the law is another question. What ought to be something desirable. Now you say that मुरली सर आप संप्रभु बन गए हैं, अब राजा बन गए हैं, लेकिन दूसरा छात्र क्या कहेगा, सर आपको राजा बनने के योग्यता नहीं है। अब ऑस्टिन बेंथम ने क्या कहा, योग्यता दूसरा सवाल है, अब उसको आप साइंस में मत लेके आना। लॉ इज अ साइंस, और साइंस में क्या है, वी आर ओनली कंसर्न विद द फैक्ट्स, एंड लॉ इज अ डिस्क्रिप्टिव साइंस, लॉ इज एन एम्पिरिकल साइंस, एंड दे सेड दैट मुरली सर इज द सॉवरेन, and how he became the sovereign, that is not important. Whether he, of course, became the sovereign through the right method or wrong method, that is not important. Whether factually he is the sovereign or not. That is where they thought that, they said that if Murali sir receives habitual obedience from the bulk of a political society, that makes him the sovereign. So you understand that. So here what I mean to tell you, because I am teaching jurisprudence, so I told you in the beginning that when I teach my students jurisprudence, first of all I will tell them that law in the beginning was understood as a branch of morality, branch of justice. Then Thomas Hobbes came. He liberated law from morality. He liberated from law from justice. And he said law is identified with order. Order is more important than justice. So he said the solution to moral dilemma is political. So he has taken you from moral to political. Then Austin Bentham come, and they said law is the command of the sovereign. They say law is a social fact. What exists as a fact, that is the law. Because they wanted to understand, they wanted us to understand law as an empirical science. And they said don't have the time to answer normative questions. Whether it's a good law or a bad law, that is an irrelevant question. That's an extraneous question. Because the law is law, whether it is good or bad. So why? Because the law is political. Law is the command of the sovereign. It is the power that defines what is the law and what is not the law. So the morality, the ethical standards are subjected to the political power. Earlier, when we believed in the higher law, so morality was, of course, deciding what is right and what is wrong. But today, the state will decide what is right and what is wrong. So that way, of course, a very important milestone had come. And here, I should also emphasize, so far as Austin and Bentham are concerned, they said what is law is a question of fact. Whether it's a good law or a bad law, it's a question of value. That is famously known as the fact-value dichotomy. So this is the heart of legal positivism. The heart of legal positivism, let me emphasize on that, because they said, what is law? It is purely a factual question. And when you want to know whether it's a good law or a bad law, that is entirely different question. That is entirely different question. That means they had two criteria. Please understand this. They had two criteria. One and another criteria. One criteria to tell you whether it is law or not. Another criteria to tell you whether it is good law or bad law. So that is the reason Austin said that the existence of law is one question. Its merit or demerit is another question. That means that is a different science. Its merit or demerit, that is the normative question. And we want to understand law purely as a descriptive science, as a factual inquiry. So the positivism in the 19th century it famously declared that what is law is a question of fact. Whether it's a good law or a bad law, that's a question of values. So I can tell you, for example, the science of law and the science of legislation. The science of law, that of course will tell you what is the law. The science of legislation will tell you what ought to be the law. Now, that is, of course, Bentham famously said, you all know that, the famous sensorial jurisprudence and expositorial jurisprudence. Sensorial jurisprudence will subject the law to moral scrutiny. Sensorial jurisprudence will tell you whether it's a good law or a bad law. Expositorial jurisprudence will tell you whether it is law or not. Now you see, once because law properly so called, law improperly so called. Now, so far as the law properly so called is concerned, Austin, of course, because Bentham and Austin, they had no respect for common law. Because until that time, because there are two systems in the world, the common law systems and the civil law systems. Civil law systems, they believe in codifying the law. They believe in codified law. Common law systems, they believe in judge-made law. So Bentham and Austin, they thought that the law should be codified. They thought a codified law is better than the common law. And they thought the common law is very unsystematic. Common law is very haphazard. Common law is not systematic. And common law is made at the spur of the moment. For example, Bentham criticized common law by saying that it is like waiting for your dog to bark. And once it starts barking, then start beating the dog. And Bentham is saying what? Common law is made after the matter goes to the court. But we should have a law even before the matter goes to the court. That is what Bentham is saying. And Bentham, of course, had very contemptuous attitude for common law. Why? That, of course, is a very big question why Bentham had contemptuous attitude for common law. That's a different philosophy altogether. But I can tell you, after Bentham and Austin, of course, came into prominence, they made legislation the central authority to make the law. And they said, judges are after all the delegates of sovereign. Judges are after all the delegates of sovereign. So whatever law is made by judges, that is not law, unless and until it is not approved by the political sovereign. So they said that the political sovereign, that is the supreme source of law. That is the only source of law. And when judges make law, Austin said what? Austin said that it can, whatever law is made by judges, that will become law only when the sovereign approves it. So yeah, it is the approval of the sovereign that makes the judicial law as a law. Otherwise, it is not a law at all. That means they said the political power is very important, and the judicial power, it is subordinate to the political power. Judicial power, it is because they said judges are after all the delegates of sovereign. And now they are saying that only judges, only parliament can look to the future. Only legislators can look to the future. Judges cannot look to the future. Because judges, they cannot. Why? Because they don't have any particular role in the building of the nation, in the making of the law. Judges don't have any role at all. Because they only follow the legislature. Now, for what reasons, if you ask me, I can tell you that. Because I don't want to go deeper into this issue right now. It all depends on the availability of time. But Bentham was a great legal reformer. So he has no patience for common law. Why? Because he thought the common law is based on morality, ethics, and judges are concerned genuinely with what is right and what is wrong. And Bentham propounded the theory of utility. Because until the time Bentham did not come, justice was the criteria to say whether it is good law or bad law. But Bentham said justice is subordinate to utility. And he said pleasure and pain will decide what is right and what is wrong. So Bentham, because he is a great utilitarian, because he said that what is right and what is wrong is subordinate to pleasure and pain, because he was a great social reformer, so he thought that the a priori understanding of what is right and what is wrong, because justice is a priori, utility is a posteriori. Utility only looks to the future, and Bentham wanted to look only to the future because he wanted to create a better society. He wanted to create a different society. He was not happy with the status quo things. He wanted that society should become dynamic. And for that, of course, he invented the theory of utility. So utility will decide what is right and what is wrong. And Bentham thought if judges are given the freedom, judges will question the law made by the legislature. That way, they will frustrate the intentions of the legislature. So Bentham wanted that judges must follow the legislature. They should not frustrate the intentions of the legislature. because he thought legislature, the law made through the legislature, it looks to the future. The political is more important. And they, of course, they can take you towards a new society. That means they can change the existing conditions in society through legislation. Of course, I can give you examples also, but then right now, I can go. I want to go forward. Now, let me introduce you to H.L.A. Hart. Now, H.L.A. Hart comes at a particular time when law was being understood as an empirical science. H.L.A. Hart thought that law cannot be understood or should not be understood as only an empirical science. Austin and Bentham, they made law an empirical science. And the realist school of law, they made law highly empirical. Now, the realists, how did they make the law highly empirical? Because you see, in the beginning, law was identified with morality and justice. Thomas Hobbes comes. He liberates law from morality and justice. He says law is based on order. Order is more important than justice. Then Austin and Bentham come. They say law is a factual science. And of course, they say law is a descriptive science. Then the realists come. Now, the realists said what? The law is highly empirical. So, why did they say the law is highly empirical? Because Austin and Bentham said that the law, of course, is made through the parliament. That is known as legislation. And Austin and Bentham, they said what? Because there are three types of things: legal formalism, legal positivism, and legal realism. So, legal formalism understands law as mathematics. That means it understands law as mathematics, because in law mathematics 2 plus 2 is equal to 4. That much of certainty is there. Now the legal formalists, they wanted to have the same certainty in the law. And they thought that the law is having the same amount of certainty which is there in mathematics. And what is that certainty? The certainty is that law is made by the legislature, it is interpreted by the court, the judges. And they thought judges are mechanical. And judges always interpret the law in accordance with the statute. And you can predict the judgment even before the judgment is delivered. That means they said that judgment is something which can be predicted even before the judgment is delivered, because judges are mechanical. They only have to apply the law on the facts of the case. And they apply the law which is already written in the statute. And the law, of course, is applied and the judgment comes. So even before the judgment comes, you can predict the judgment with certainty. So law is like mathematics. That is what the legal formalists said. Legal positivists also follow the same thing. Legal positivists, even they followed the same thing. Because even they thought that law is like mathematics. And judges are mechanical. Judges only interpret the law. And they interpret the law mechanically, because the law is already made by the statute. And judges do not make the law, they only interpret the law. That was the popular understanding at the time. But amongst the legal positivists, H.L.A. Hart is the only exception. H.L.A. Hart, he of course accepted that law is, of course, like a science. He said there is certainty in the law. But he said that there is the language of law, which is, of course, the English language. It has an open texture. He said language has a umbra of certainty, but a penumbra of uncertainty. And that particular approach of H.L.A. Hart, I will come to that very shortly. Because H.L.A. Hart, right now I can tell you one sentence about H.L.A. Hart. He said law is a combination of primary and secondary rules. That means when he talked about rules, he's trying to make law a normative science. He says law is a combination of rules, primary and secondary rules. And law, of course, is a normative science. But he said sometimes the rules might be having an open texture. That means there's a particular word which can be having a number of uncertainty, also a number of uncertainty. So then H.L.A. Hart said that judges have discretion to go beyond the law and to make the law. So H.L.A. Hart said that law is not only rules, it also includes discretion. So he said law is rules plus discretion. Now I will come to H.L.A. Hart shortly. I will come back to H.L.A. Hart. But let me now take you to the realists. Now the realists, they wanted to dispel all the odds, O-U-G-H-T-S. They wanted to dispel all the odds from the law. And they wanted to focus only on the ease. Because ease is highly factual. Suppose you say, who is the king? That is, you are asking a factual question. Suppose you ask, who ought to be the king? That's a normative question. Now, they realized, they said that the law made by the legislature, it is not law. That is, of course, a very revolutionary thought. They said the statute is not a law. The statute, only after interpretation by the court, it becomes the law. So until then, the statute is not law at all. But then you were given to understand by Austin and Bentham, who of course were empiricists. But Austin and Bentham said statute is already law, even before it is interpreted by the court. And they thought the law pre-exists the judgment. Even before the judgment is delivered, there is already the law. But the realists said there is no law until the time the judgment is not delivered. So they said law is an official action. Law is an official action. Law is what the judges declare. But your traditional understanding, your orthodox understanding is what? Law is the rules and regulation which regulate the official action. But the realist said that what the official says is the law. And who is that official? Judge is the official. They said what judge says is the law. The law, Justice Gray said, law is what judges declare. And Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, who is considered to be the spiritual father of realism, he said that the prophecies of what the courts do in actual practice and nothing more pretentious is what I mean by the law. That means they are obsessed with the facts. And they say the judgment is, of course, factually there. So until we see the fact, because the law which is contained in the statute, it is only an ought. And the judgment is the is. And the is, of course, factual. The ought is normative. And they said the normative is not the law because they never believed in the normative. Now you will ask me a question. So why the realists said that the statute is not law? Why did they say that the statute is normative? So why did they not accept the statute to be law? Because they said that judges are not mechanical, like it was understood by others. Judges are human beings, they have their own likes and dislikes, and they have their own subjectivity, and their personality influences them, the social background, their economic background, their cultural background, and they are not washing machines, they are not mechanical. It is not mechanical jurisprudence. The law is not like mathematics. Here everything is uncertain. And now you cannot predict the judgment with certainty. Now it is only a myth that you can predict the judgment with certainty. And now they said that you have to wait until the judgment is delivered. And only when the judgment is delivered, you can say what the law is. Until then, there is no law at all. Now, that particular understanding is why, because they are saying that the statute is interpreted by the judges, and judges have their own personality. The rules in the statute are impersonal, but judges are not impersonal. The rules are impersonal, the rules are neutral, but judges are not impersonal. Judges are personal. Judges are not neutral. Though, of course, we want the judges to be neutral, we want the judges to be impersonal, but they are not impersonal because they are also human beings like us, and they are also affected by their surroundings. And all these influence the judge. And the judge is, of course, influenced by these factors, his social background, his economic background, his political background. So that, of course, influences the judgment. So the realists, they said that because the law is same, but there are so many judgments. If the matter goes before Justice Pandey, now you get one judgment. If the same matter goes before Justice Mishra, you will get another judgment. And if the same matter goes before Justice Krishna here, now you get another judgment. Then when the law is same, how there are so many judgments? Because that is the question to be answered. Then they said that the personality of the judge, that was not highlighted by Austin and Bentham. They thought judges are mechanical. And so they thought that law is, of course, the command of the political sovereign. But they completely ignored the importance of the judges. Now the realists are saying that the true lawmaker is the person who interprets the law. The lawmaker is not the person who makes the law sitting in the parliament. The lawmaker is that person who interprets the law. The persons who interpret the law, they are the makers of the law. So that way they said that law is they made law highly empirical. So when law is made highly empirical, then the sociological school came. Now you all know what is the sociological school. Sociological school wants to understand the law in action. Now the law in action and the law in theory. Now what is the law in theory? That is normative. But what is the law in action? That is empirical. And now you want to see the empirical functioning of the law. So when you want to understand how the law functions in society, for example, Roscoe Pound, who is considered to be the father of American sociological movement, what did he say? He said that we of course want to know What are you for? No, what are you? You say, I am the law. But then what are you for? What are your functions? Now, for example, what are you for? I am for. What is the chair? You ask, what are you? I say, I am the chair. Then Roscoe will say, what is the chair for? The chair is meant for sitting. That is the purpose of the chair. That is the function of the chair. So you identify the chair not only through the formal criteria. Austin and Bentham said only the formal criteria is important to identify the law. But the sociological school is saying the functional criteria is equally important. The form and the function cannot be separated. Now, the chair is not understood only through the formal structure. The chair also is meant for sitting. If the chair is not comfortable for sitting, though it might be having all the formal criteria, yet we will not call it as a chair. Why? Because it is not serving its minimum purpose. So, the sociological school, they wanted to study the law in action. And that is where here you understand that when it comes to sociological school, there are two types of sociological, that means law in relation to society, how it can be understood. One is the empiricist sociology. The other one is the interpretative sociology. What is this empiricist sociology? Empiricist sociology will study the society. Like the natural scientist, he studies the nature. Now, the social scientist, he studies the society through the same methods which are used in the natural sciences. That means they are empirical in their approach, and they don't distinguish between natural sciences and social sciences. They apply the same methods which you use in the natural sciences to understand the society also, because they think the society can be understood through the same methods which are used in the natural sciences. And that, of course, is still prevailing in USA, which is, of course, the empirical method of understanding society. One example I can give you. For example, if the crime rate in a particular area is very high, and what is that area? There the people are very poor. So you think that poverty is the reason for the crime. So what is your hypothesis in your PhD work? The hypothesis you draw is that whether poverty is the root cause of the crimes. And then now, because you understand in that particular area where poverty is high, the crimes are more than compared to other areas. So you make an hypothesis that poverty is the reason for the crime. And then you conduct your empirical study. That is, of course, you understand that society can also be understood through the same methods which you use in natural sciences. But Karl Marx and then Max Weber, Durkheim, Juggait, no, they thought that society cannot be understood through the same methods which are used in the natural sciences. Society does not consist of robots. Society consists of living persons. And living persons are different from sulfuric acid. Living persons are different from hydrochloric acid. Living persons are different from water. Water has fixed properties. Sulfuric acid has fixed properties. But social sciences, they deal with human beings. The human beings are not robotic. They are not mechanical. So they thought that we have to interpret the society. And we cannot understand the society only through external observation. We have to infiltrate into the structures of the society. We have to go down into the layers of the society. That is what Karl Marx has done. Because capitalism looks very gentle externally. But once you infiltrate into capitalism, when you conduct your research into capitalism, then you can expose the ugly face of capitalism. That is what Marx has done. Because he did an interpretative work. He interpreted what are the external appearances, and he wanted to explode that external appearances. So that, of course, is sociological school where you want to study the law in action. Now come back to see when law was almost becoming an applied science, when law was becoming a social science, when law was completely becoming empirical, then the theory in law that was being questioned. So Professor H.L.A. Hart was very much disturbed that law is becoming highly empirical. The realists are making it highly empirical. The normative foundations are being questioned. And law is no more considered as a normative science. It is completely empirical, highly empirical. And law is almost a branch of social science. That is what the law of sociology and the sociology of law. When you study Roscoe Pound wanted to understand the society through the law. That is sociological jurisprudence. But when you go to law of sociology, they understand the society through different methods, and law is only one method there among several other methods. So they are the people who subscribe to the philosophy of law of sociology. But sociological jurisprudence, Roscoe Pound, Roscoe Pound wanted to look at the society through the prism of law. He made the law the epicenter, and he did not succumb to the social forces. And if I can tell you one very interesting information, Roscoe Pound was the dean of the Harvard Law Faculty for a very long time, and so long as he was the dean, he did not recruit any social science teacher, political science teacher, because he did not want social science teachers to come to the law department. Why? Because he did not want the law to become a social science. He thought that law, of course, is a unique subject, an autonomous subject. So he wanted to understand the society through the law. Instead of understanding the law through the society, he wanted to understand the law through the society through the law. That, of course, is a very big point. And now let me come to H.L.A. Hart. What Hart? Why Hart is disturbed? Hart is disturbed because now law is becoming highly empirical, and he wanted to make law normative. Hart thought the statute is already law. The statute is law even before it is interpreted by the court. So he thought, how can the realist say that the statute is only a source of law, and the statute is not law until it is not interpreted by the court? That disturbed Hart. Now Hart is saying what? Hart is attacking Austin and Bentham because they wanted to make law completely a factual science. You know, Hart argued against them by saying that law is not a factual science, law is a normative science. And when Hart said that law is a normative science, so why did he say that? Because he understood that law can be understood by observing the conduct of the people in the society. Now look at the common man, linguistic empiricism. How does the common man understand the law? What is the language they use? How do they understand the words, which of course we use? For example, when you go to your house, you say, Mother, where are you? Now the reply comes from your mother, I am here. That means you know that your mother is in the kitchen. Others do not know because the law and the language, the linguistic things, they are connected with each other. Your mother said, I am here. That means you understand she is in the kitchen because you are her son. And you know right now she is in the kitchen. And then suppose you go in the evening and say, Mother, where are you? And she says, I am here. Now you understand that she is, of course, in the front room. Now, how are you understanding? Because Hart says the linguistic usages, the common man, how do they understand? So Hart says there are so many social rules in the society. And these social rules, of course, every society had rules. That is what he says. Every society had shared the rules. That means people understood things very commonly. They had a common understanding of the rules. And they used to follow the rules together. Commonly, they used to follow the rules. But some rules were rules of obligation. That means some rules impose obligations on you. That is where Hart is criticizing Austin. Austin did not understand the distinction between being obliged and being obligated. Suppose the law shows a gun at you and tells you that give me your money or I will kill you, I will shoot you. Now the law is obliging you. Law is like a gunda. But then rules obligate you, commands oblige you. Austin thought law is the command. Hart is saying law is the rules. The rules have certain normative language. And they, of course, are imposing obligation according to particular normative criteria. So when we, of course, lived in the primitive societies, Hart says even the primitive societies had law, but they did not have a legal system. Now, Hart distinguishes between law and legal system. He said the legal system came subsequently, when the legislature came, when the judiciary came, when the secondary rules of obligation came. Then we had the legal system. But we can have law even without the legal system. So Hart is saying that the primitive societies already had the law. And what is meant by law? Obligation rules. How do you understand that this particular rule imposes obligation? Now, there are many rules which, of course, do not impose obligation. But there are rules which impose obligation. And what is this obligation? Sometimes the obligation may be in the form of a punishment. Sometimes the obligation may be in the form of a lesser than punishment. You are subjected to ridicule, or you are made a mockery, and you are criticized. Now, that is, of course, not a physical sanction. Austin says, Hart says, when the obligation comes in the form of a moral approval and moral disapproval, these are moral rules. But when the obligation comes in the form of a legal sanction, that means the society is taking it seriously. It is no more a habit. Hart distinguishes between habit and rules. Going to cinema is a habit, but stopping at the red light is a rule. Now, cinema, habits are not normative, but rules are normative. Habits have only external dimension. Rules, apart from having external dimension, they also have an internal dimension. The reflective attitude to obey the law. That means you stop at the red light because you think that's a standard that ought to be complied with. You are not worried about whether the policeman is there or not, because the bad man is concerned about what will happen, but the good man is concerned about what ought to happen. Austin is Austin is only concerned about the bad man. The realist is only concerned about the bad man. They are talking about when the law is not followed, what will happen. Punishment is very important. Because the bad man only fears punishment, but the good man fears the rules. The good man, he fears the rules. That means what Hart is doing, Hart is trying to give a depoliticized image of law. Depoliticize. He is trying to separate law from political power. And he is saying that judicial power is completely independent of the political sovereign. Judiciary has got their own powers. Their powers are not dependent, they are not the delegates of sovereign. So Hart says that custom is already a law, even before it is accepted by the sovereign. Hart was the first jurist to say that you can have law without a legal system. You don't require a government to have a law. Even the primitive societies had the law. And what is that law? It comes in the form of an obligation. So the primitive societies, they had law, but subsequently they had certain problems also, because who will identify the law, who will change the law, who will adjudicate the law. As society becomes more complex, then of course you require secondary rules. Primary rules are only duty imposing, secondary rules are power conferring. So Hart says Austin did not understand power conferring rules. Austin did not understand the nature of power conferring rules. Law gives the powers to make a contract, to write a will, and of course many other powers also. Law has a performative role. What is the performative role? Law changes your status. Once you get married, you become a husband. Law gives you the status of a husband. And then when you enter into a contract, law says that you are the offeror, and then a promisor, promisee. So this is the language of law. So this is the internal language of the law. So law has a very sophisticated language. So Hart is saying what? Law is normative. And now, see, after the primary rules, Hart is talking about the secondary rules. It is rules and rules. He is not talking about the sovereign. Because Hart says there is no sovereign like Austin envisaged. There is no Austinian sovereign anywhere. No, the rules are sovereign. The rule of recognition is sovereign. The rule of recognition will tell you what are the sources of law. And the rule of recognition, of course, is empirical. But that will tell you how to come from the pre-legal world into the legal world. So here I want to tell you that Professor H.L.A. Hart, he says that if you understand law purely as a descriptive science, there are very big problems. What is the problem? For example, there is a sovereign, he dies, his son becomes the king, and his son, of course, because according to Austin, law is something, sovereign is a factual thing. Now, habitual obedience makes you sovereign. Now, his son has taken over, and his son has issued the commands. And now we have to wait and see whether his commands are also habitually followed by the people or not. And until the time you understand whether the commands are actually followed or not habitually, until that time you should accept that there is no sovereign. And according to Austin, if there is no sovereign, there is no law. That means Hart is saying what? Law continues, though the ruler dies. Though the ruler dies, the law continues. The rules continue, though the ruler dies. But if you understand law as the commands of the sovereign, personal, that means when the king dies, the law also comes to an end. So how can it be? According to Hart, law has got the quality of continuity. And that continuity will be disturbed if you understand law purely as a factual science. Law is a normative science. And what is that normative science? Now, there is a rule which is accepted in that particular society that after the death of the king, his son will become the king. Now, his son ought to be the king. That is the rule. So, what made the son the sovereign is not the habit of obedience. What made the son the sovereign is the rule that he ought to be the king. That means the rule made him the sovereign. The rule is the standard, and the rule is something which is accepted by the people over there. So the acceptance by the people is very important. But Hart says here what? That this particular rule, which is of course, he has the right to succeed his father. Right. That right made him the sovereign. Right is the normative word. Austin doesn't understand this type of a language. Right and wrong, entitlement, and then who is the line of succession. Austin identifies law only with power, whether it is right or wrong. But Hart is saying that even the sovereign is not above the law. We, of course, use a normative language. We use a civilized language. We are concerned with what is right and what is wrong. The good man is concerned about what is right. The good man is concerned about what ought to happen. The statute is the concern of the good man. The judgment is the concern of the bad man. The good man is guided by the statute. He understands what is the law in the statute and he regulates his behavior. And the bad man, because he wants to break the law, because he does not want to respect the law, so he is always interested to know what is the law factually. So he understands law as a descriptive science, but the good man understands law as a normative science. So Hart is saying what? This understanding of law as a descriptive science and a normative science, that is the secret to understand what exactly is the nature of law. Because every person doesn't respect the law only because of the fear of the policeman. Now, of course, many of us obey the law only because of the fear of the policeman. But there are so many others also who obey the law because they think it's a standard that ought to be complied with. Habits are not normative. Going to cinema is a habit, but stopping at the red light, it's a rule. The rules are normative. Rules have an internal dimension. So I think I should stop here so far as H.L.A. Hart is concerned. Now my journey. Hart, after saying all that, I told you he admitted that there is an open texture in the language. So he said law is not only rules, it also includes discretion. What is that discretion? So Hart says whenever there is no law, whenever there is an ambiguity in the law because of the open texture, judge will go beyond the law and judge will make the law and judge will again come back into the law and then he will posit a POSIT, that particular law in the judgment, because he is a positivist. So he has to posit. Positivism believes in law is posited, law is laid down. So laid down where? In the judgment or in the statute. By whom? By a law-making authority. So judge is, of course, making the law. He went beyond the law because it's a difficult case. So law is rules plus discretion. Judge went beyond the law. Now, the moment you say discretion, you must have understood now. Discretion again brings in the personal element. Now, Hart wanted to minimize the personal element. Austin highlighted the personal element. Realists exaggerated the personal element because they thought law is empirical. Austin thought law is the command of sovereign. Realists thought what law is what judges declare. They highlighted the human element. But Hart wants to say that the human beings are not important. The rules are important. Modi ji is not important. Rahul Gandhi ji is not important. Rules are important. Supreme Court judges are not important. The rules are important. Judges must also follow the rules. So if you say rules are important, you are normative. If you say human beings are important, that means you are descriptive. So Hart is saying what? Law is a combination of primary and secondary rules. But even then he admitted that there is certain open texture in the law. So there he brought in the word discretion. And why are we afraid about the word discretion? Discretion brings in the human element. So judges will go beyond the law and make the law. But traditionally we understand judges only interpret the law. But Hart is permitting the judges to make the law. But now Hart says what? Sir, in 99% of the cases, the judgment is given in accordance with the rules. There is no problem at all. Only in 1% of the cases there is ambiguity in the law. Only in 1% of the cases judges go beyond the law and make the law. That is only 1%, sir. Otherwise, the law is only rules. Because when you ask Hart this question, why are you giving importance to discretion? Because discretion is something which we don't like. We, the law teachers, we law students, we don't want discretion to govern the law, to govern the rules. We think that discretion is a bad thing. And we want the law to be rules. So rules, of course, minimize discretion. But if discretion again comes back, then Hart is saying law is only rules, but sometimes it is discretion. And the discretion is what? The discretion is enabling the judge to go beyond the law and make the law and again come back into the law and posit that law in the judgment. Now here Dworkin comes. Now I am going to Dworkin because in my journey as a teacher of jurisprudence, when Dworkin comes, now Dworkin of course has high appreciation for Hart because he says Hart has done a wonderful job. What is that? Hart understood law from the perspective of a common man, from the perspective of an ordinary English usage, how we use the words in the common vocabulary. So from there, Hart understands what is the law for a layman. Then gradually he understands what is the law for a common lawman. So he starts at the grassroots level. So Dworkin has great, because what is legal obligation? In what manner legal obligation is different from a moral obligation? What about the opinion of a common man? What does the word personality mean so far as a common man is concerned? So Hart has this because I don't have time. Here, Hart has entirely converted the nature of the question. What is basically a very normative question, a very difficult question. So he says in what manner law is different from the orders given by a gunman. Instead of defining law, he starts with the question in what manner the law is different from the orders given by a gunda. So from there he starts instead of defining law like Austin, because he has a different approach altogether. Now, of course, that I will speak at some other time in future if you again invite me. But right now, Dworkin has high appreciation for Hart, but Dworkin has a strong objection also. What is that objection? He said, Mr. Hart, you cannot say law is rules plus discretion. Because discretion is very dangerous. I mean, again, it is bringing in the human element. And once the human element is brought, your legal positivism again will collapse into legal realism. Because Mr. Hart, you are attacking legal realism. You say that they made law highly empirical and you want to make law normative. Of course, you succeeded in making law normative. You said law is also in the statute. Law is not only a judgment. Judgment is the concern of the bad man. Statute is the concern of the good man. Okay, you have done good things. But why did you bring in discretion? Hart said because the language has open texture. In 1% of the cases, judges go beyond the law. Now, Dworkin is saying that, Mr. Hart, your judge will go frequently beyond the law. You said only in 1% he will go beyond the law. But Dworkin proved that in 99% of the cases, your judge will go beyond the law. And your legal positivism will collapse into legal realism. Why? Why your judge will go 99% beyond the law? Dworkin says, Mr. Hart, you are an Englishman. You are a positivist. And all the positivists, they wanted to separate law from morality. And if you understand that law can be separated from morality, if law is only rules, and if rules are only empirical, Mr. Hart, rules alone are not sufficient to answer the questions which go before the court. If rules are the only law, then most of the cases that go to the appellate courts, the High Court and the Supreme Court, they cannot be answered only with the help of the rules. Law requires the help of morality. Law cannot be separated from morality. And it is the morality that will prevent the judge from going beyond the law. And so long as you say that law is only rules, you said rules are mostly certain. So in 99% of the cases, judges will not go beyond the law. But Mr. Hart, you understand, so long as you understand law only in the empirical sense, your rule of recognition is only empirical. And so long as you take an empirical view of law, your judge will go beyond the law, not only in 1%, he will go in 99%. So if you want to prevent the judge from going beyond the law, if you want the judge to be within the parameters of law, then you should accept that law is not only rules, it also includes principles. So Dworkin substitutes the word discretion with the word principles. He says law is not rules plus discretion. Law is rules plus principles. What are these principles? These are the moral dimensions of the law. The rules are in black and white, but the principles are not in black and white. And so far the positivist is concerned, he will accept only what is in black and white as law. But Dworkin is saying that though the principles are not in black and white, they are as much a law as the rules are. Because the principles are the best justification for the black letter rules. So tomorrow when the judge is having a difficult case, when the judge is having a hard case, now obviously the judges of course will rely on principles. Because morality is the weight of law. अगर आपका वजन क्या है, आप कहेंगे मेरा वजन 70 किलो है, लेकिन नैतिकता का वजन नहीं है आपके अंदर. Morality is the weight of the law. Principles give weight to the law. अगर आप सिद्धांतवादी हैं, अगर आपका वजन है, सिद्धांतवादी आपका वजन 70 किलो है, लेकिन नैतिकता का वजन भी आपके अंदर है. अगर लॉ के अंदर नैतिकता का वजन नहीं होगा, इफ लॉ इज ओनली एम्पेरिकल, लॉ में कोई वजन नहीं है. लॉ का वजन कब आएगा? जब लॉ को प्रिंसिपल्स के साथ पढ़ेंगे. सिद्धांतवादी क्या करेगा? मुश्किल घड़ी में भी सिद्धांत को फॉलो करेगा. हार्ट का जज ने क्या किया? जब डिफिकल्ट केस आ गया, कानून के बाहर चला गया और कानून के बाहर जाके स्वयं कानून बना दिया. डॉर्किन का क्या कहना है? जज को कानून बनाने का अधिकार कहाँ से आया? स्ट्रिक्टली डॉक्ट्रिन ऑफ सेपरेशन ऑफ पावर्स. एंड डॉर्किन से जजेस कैन नेवर मेक द लॉ. Judges only can interpret the law. So Dworkin said judges are not active makers of law. At the same time, judges are not passive finders of law. Judges are not active makers of law. Judges are not passive finders of law. Judges only interpret the law, expound the law. तो Dworkin क्या कहता है? According to the Blackstonian theory, separation of powers को आप फॉलो करेंगे मॉन्टेस्क्यू का, तो आपको लगेगा जुडिशरी मस्ट नेवर मेक द लॉ, जजेस कैन नेवर लुक टू द फ्यूचर, judges are not political. If you say judges can go beyond the law, you are making judges also political. Again, you are making judges as the delegates of the sovereign. Judges are autonomous. Judges have judges that derive their power not from the political power. Judges' power is independent of the political power. And when you want to say, because even Hart wanted to say that, he wanted to give a depoliticized image of law. But he said in 1% of the cases, but Dworkin is saying that in 1%, no, judges will frequently go beyond the law. Why? Because you understand law only as empirical thing. And your rule of recognition cannot identify principles, because principles are not identified on the basis of form. Principles are identified through a different method. Principles are identified on the basis of content. Rules are identified on the basis of form. Your entire positivism is only believes in formal criteria. They don't understand the content. And the principles are the content of the law. And the rules are the form of the law. And the principles, they enable the judge to interpret the rules in a better manner. So Dworkin is taking this argument and he's saying what? If you want to ensure that law continues to be a normative science, and if you want to say that law is not empirical or highly empirical like the realists have done, then you should prevent the judges from going beyond the law. And how is that possible? Only when you understand that law cannot be separated from morality. Morality is the weight of law. आप positivist ने क्या किया? What is law is one question. What ought to be the law is another question. And you wanted to separate the is from the ought. That cannot be separated. The ought is influencing the is. The is is not is without the help of ought. The is requires the ought. So the ought influences the is. The ought is normative and the is descriptive. But you cannot separate them. And Dworkin ने क्या बताया? If you see the judgment, because Dworkin says his thesis is not only prescriptive, it is also prescriptive, it is also descriptive. इसके बाद Dworkin क्या बता रहा है? मैं कहता हूँ लॉ इज नॉट ओनली रूल्स, इट ऑल्सो इंक्लूड्स प्रिंसिपल्स. और वही भी बताता है जजेस ये करते भी हैं. Judges actually follow principles when giving the judgment. So I can also give you so many cases where judges follow the principles. Well, judges think law is not only rules. They think law is not also, it also includes principles. They don't think that they have a discretion to go beyond the law. So Dworkin is saying that judges do not have strong discretion. He admits that judges have weak discretion. What is the difference between strong discretion and weak discretion? Dworkin is saying that judges will remain within the law. And within the law, they will search for the principles. Because the principles have to be searched. The rules are there in black and white. The principles have to be searched within the law. And that takes some time. And of course, you have to give that time. And once so you should not go beyond the law. So here Dworkin, he says there are so many cases which are decided by the courts. And the courts, they understand that law is not only rules. They understand law as including principles also. एक केस डॉर्किन ने जो डिस्कस करता है रिक्स वर्सेस पामर, उसमें ग्रैंडसन ने ग्रैंडफादर को मर्डर कर दिया क्योंकि ग्रैंडफादर ने ग्रैंडसन के पक्ष में वसीयत लिखा और ग्रैंडसन ने इंतज़ार किया और उसके बाद जब उनको लगा ग्रैंडफादर इतना जल्दी नहीं मरेगा, हो सकता है, उन्होंने ग्रैंडफादर को मर्डर कर दिया. तो मर्डर करने के बाद ग्रैंडसन ने कहा सर मुझे संपत्ति दे दीजिए, मैं जेल तो जाएंगे, मर्डर किया हूँ, लेकिन अकॉर्डिंग टू द लॉ ऑफ टेस्टामेंटरी सक्सेशन विच इज इन ब्लैक एंड वाइट, I should be given that is the law which is in black and white. So I should be given the property. I am entitled to the property. Though of course, आप मुझे जेल भेज दीजिएगा, लेकिन अमेरिकन सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने 2 साल इसका सोचने के बाद क्या जजमेंट दिया? यू विल गो टू जेल मिस्टर पोता, आप जेल जाएंगे क्योंकि आपको संपत्ति भी नहीं मिलेगा. संपत्ति क्यों नहीं मिलेगा? पोता ने पूछा. सर लॉ तो ब्लैक एंड वाइट में है और मुझे संपत्ति मिलना चाहिए. बट जजेस सेड यू कैन नॉट टेक एडवांटेज ऑफ योर ओन रॉन्ग. नाउ judges said that this is an equitable principle, that you cannot take advantage of your own wrong. And that principle is used to interpret the rule. So the rules require interpretation through the principles. The principles, अभी मैं आपको बहुत जल्दी एक पॉइंट बताएंगे क्योंकि आपको मेरा सब्जेक्ट मैटर, आपको मेरा आइडिया क्या है आपको बताना चाहता हूँ. ये प्रिंसिपल्स को याद रखिए. प्रिंसिपल्स आर द वेट ऑफ द लॉ. प्रिंसिपल्स कानून को वजन देता है. और ड्वॉर्किन का कहने के अनुसार व्हाट इज द हार्ड केस? हार्ट के अनुसार व्हाट इज द हार्ट केस? व्हेन द लैंग्वेज इज हैविंग ओपन टेक्सचर. ड्वॉर्किन कहता है रिक्स वर्सेस पामर का केस में लैंग्वेज में कोई एम्बिग्यूटी नहीं है. व्हाट इज अ विल, व्हाट इज अ टेस्टामेंट, व्हाट इज सक्सेशन, इसमें कोई एम्बिग्यूटी नहीं है. Even then, Ricks versus Palmer is a difficult case. No, Hart cannot explain why is it a difficult case. Because Hart only goes according to language. But Dworkin says Ricks versus Palmer is a difficult case. Why? Why is it a difficult case? Because two principles came into conflict. What are the principles? One principle is no person can take advantage of his own wrong. What is the other principle? The law made by democratic legislature must be respected. The law made by democratic legislature must be respected. And majority जो डेमोक्रेसी में कानून बनाया उन्होंने क्या बताया? वसीयत किसका पक्ष में लिखा हुआ है उनको संपत्ति मिलना चाहिए. That principle came into conflict with the other principle. No person can take advantage of his own wrong. जज क्या करेगा? इन दोनों प्रिंसिपल में उस केस का फैक्ट्स के अनुसार, सर्कमस्टेंसेस के अनुसार किस प्रिंसिपल को ज्यादा वजन है? Principles conflict. Rules do not conflict. Principles conflict with each other. If rules conflict, that means one rule is valid, other rule is not valid. And we have doctrinal techniques to resolve the controversy with regard to rules. The later rule will prevail over the formal rule. The special rule will prevail over the general rule. लेकिन principles में ऐसा नहीं है. When principles conflict, principles have dimensions of weight. So you should see which principle, so far as that case is concerned, enjoys more weight than the other principle. So in the Ricks versus Palmer case, the judges thought the principle that no person can take advantage of his own wrong, that has more weight than the other principle that the law made by democratic legislature must be respected. इसी वजह से पोता को संपत्ति से वंचित किया गया. अब हार्ट क्या कहेगा? हार्ट ये कहेगा डॉर्किन से, सर रिक्स वर्सेस पामर जजमेंट इट इज नॉट इन अकॉर्डेंस विद द लॉ बिकॉज जजेस डिड नॉट फॉलो द लॉ. Because Hart is a positivist, he will not accept principles as law. So he says that Ricks versus Palmer case, it is wrongly decided because judges did not give judgment in accordance with the black letter rule. Dworkin क्या कहेगा? Principles are also law. Principles are not outside the law. Principles are internal to the law. Fuller is a teacher of Dworkin. Fuller ने क्या कहा? Inner morality. Fuller का inner morality उसी प्रकार से Dworkin is the student of Fuller. Fuller is an American. Dworkin is also an American. Dworkin क्या बता रहा है? Principles are internal to the law. Policies are external to law. Dworkin क्या कहता है? Policies are for the legislature. They are external to law. But principles are for the judiciary. Judiciary will follow the principles. So principles are as much a law as the rules are. अगर आप हार्ट कहेगा principles are not law, Dworkin क्या कहेगा? If you say principles are not law, then I will prove that rules are not law. आपका positivism is built on the edifice of rules. And if you challenge me, Mr. Hart, by saying that principles are not law, then I will prove that your rules are not law. Why? Because without principles, law is empty. लॉ में कोई वजन नहीं, लॉ इज ओनली रूल्स, लॉ में कोई वजन नहीं है. तब आपका जज जो भी केस जाएगा अपीलेट कोर्ट में, उसमें नैतिकता का डायमेंशन का क्वेश्चन आता है और आपका जज बार बार कानून के बाहर जाएगा और योर लीगल पॉजिटिविज्म विल कोलैप्स इनटू लीगल रियलिज्म. So if you want to ensure that legal positivism doesn't collapse into legal realism, Mr. Hart, you should accept that principles are also law. Because the danger is what? If you say principles are not law, I will prove that your rules are not law. Because आपका जज बार बार बाहर जाएगा और रूल्स को धिक्कार करेगा, रूल्स को फॉलो नहीं करेगा, बार बार बाहर जाएगा. But these rules are also not law. And now the question, final question is what? How principles are identified? But Dworkin says principles are not identified through rule of recognition. Rule of recognition हार्ट का है, वो एम्पेरिकल है. और Dworkin का क्या कहना है? एम्पेरिकल क्राइटेरिया से आप प्रिंसिपल्स को आइडेंटिफाई नहीं कर सकते. प्रिंसिपल को मॉरल टेस्ट से आइडेंटिफाई करना पड़ेगा. They require a moral test. That means वजन का टेस्ट होता है. So even Dworkin admits every principle is not a legal principle. So there are some principles, some of them are legal. So which principle is a legal principle? It depends on how much weight that particular principle has in that particular context. तो इस प्रकार से Dworkin ने law is rules plus principles कहा. अभी मैं आपको थोड़ा डिपार्ट का मेरा आइडिया क्या है, फॉलो मी नाउ. मैंने लॉ इज अ ब्रांच ऑफ मोरालिटी कहा हूँ पहले. हॉब्स ने लिबरेट किया है, ऑस्टिन बेंथम फैक्चुअल बनाया, फिर हार्ट रियलिस्ट आया, दे मेड लॉ हाईली फैक्चुअल. तब हार्ट आया, लॉ को नॉर्मेटिव बनाया, बट इस लॉ इज रूल्स प्लस डिस्क्रिशन. देन Dworkin आता है और Dworkin बताया लॉ इज रूल्स प्लस प्रिंसिपल्स. इसमें आप लोग देखिएगा लॉ हायर लॉ से शुरू हुआ. लॉ इज अ ब्रांच ऑफ मोरालिटी. ऊपर से नीचे आया, लॉ को नैतिकता से अलग किया, जस्टिस से अलग किया, लॉ को फैक्चुअल बनाया, हाईली फैक्चुअल बनाया. फिर हार्ट आया, फिर ऊपर लेके गया, लॉ इज नॉर्मेटिव, इसका मतलब ऊपर से नीचे आया, फिर नीचे से ऊपर, लॉ इज नॉर्मेटिव। ड्वॉर्किन आया, फिर और ऊपर लेके गया, लॉ इज रूल्स प्लस प्रिंसिपल्स। आर यू फॉलोइंग मी? दैट मीन्स ये जर्नी में आपको जो बता रहा हूं, कैसे ऊपर से नीचे आया, अगेन वी स्टार्टेड गोइंग फ्रॉम बॉटम टू टॉप। ये कैसा हुआ? अब आपका पॉजिटिविज्म अपना पीक में था, ये दूसरा डायमेंशन है। आपका सेकेंड वर्ल्ड वॉर हुआ, when Hitler finally, of course, was defeated, his soldiers were captured, they were put on trial, and the Nuremberg court, which decided the trial, they said that, of course, law is not only the commands of the sovereign. They said law requires minimum morality. ये मिनिमम मोरालिटी का मतलब क्या है? फिर आप हायर लॉ की तरफ जा रहे हैं। मोरालिटी को आपने हायर बना दिया, क्यों? क्योंकि जब तक मोरालिटी को आपने इंपॉर्टेंस दिया, लॉ इज आइडेंटिफाइड थ्रू मोरालिटी, देयर वाज नो हायर लॉ। when law became political when law became political, law में नैतिकता धीरे धीरे गायब होना शुरू किया, because law is becoming more political, less connected to morals। और जो नैतिकता लॉ से गायब हो गया, वो सब हायर लॉ बन गया। So now we will say justice is a higher thing, morality is a higher thing, law is what the sovereign says। तो इस प्रकार से आपने किया, तो जस्टिस मोरालिटी, आपने क्या कहा? जस्टिस इज द मेजरिंग रॉड ऑफ लॉ, जस्टिस इज द क्राइटेरिया टू डिसाइड वेदर इट्स अ गुड लॉ और बैड लॉ। लेकिन एक समय लोग क्या बताया? लॉ में जस्टिस होना ही पड़ेगा, तभी वो लॉ है। लेकिन बाद में हम लोग क्या बताए हैं? लॉ लॉ है, जस्टिस होने का कोई जरूरी नहीं है। जस्टिस को कैसा इस्तेमाल किया आपने? You use justice to decide whether it's a good law or a bad law. But you say it is already a law. Justice will only decide whether it is a good law or bad law. लेकिन न्यूरमबर्ग कोर्ट ने क्या बताया? अगेन जस्टिस को स्वागत किया। आप लोगों में कुछ लोग सवाल पूछेंगे, सर आप नैतिकता और जस्टिस को सिनोनिमसली इस्तेमाल कर रहे हैं। यस, I do understand the distinction between morality and justice, but I am using them synonymously. I'll explain why. Because morality, or see, morality is the bigger thing. When you say morality, आप क्या कहेंगे? Moral, immoral, good, bad. This is the language of morality. Justice में क्या है? Right, wrong, just, unjust. So when you use the word unjust, when you use the word immoral, it is immoral, it is unjust. Unjust is the language of justice, immoral is the language of morality. The Hart says that justice is something which connects law and morality. Justice connects law with morality. Morality is the bigger thing, justice is a part of that particular bigger thing. तो जस्टिस को लॉ से निकट संबंध है, क्योंकि आप कल मान लीजिए परीक्षा का कॉपी लिखे हैं, आप मेरे पास आएंगे, आपने कहे सर आपने कुछ मुझे कम नंबर दिया, आप जस्टिस का भाषा इस्तेमाल करेंगे, सर आपने मेरे साथ इनजस्टिस किया, इसके बाद आप लॉ का लैंग्वेज इस्तेमाल कर रहे हैं, बिकॉज जस्टिस इज क्लोज टू लॉ। Why? Because you are asking it as a matter of claim. You are saying that I am entitled to more marks. Justice is an entitlement. Morality is not an entitlement. Morality is a matter of charity. अब चैरिटी क्या है? सर मुझे नंबर दे दीजिए, भिखारी कहेगा मुझे पैसा दे दीजिए। लेकिन जस्टिस में क्या होगा? आपको मुझे देना ही पड़ेगा, बिकॉज यू से इट एज ए मैटर ऑफ राइट, एंटाइटलमेंट। तो इसमें क्या है? जस्टिस को आपने एक मेजरिंग रॉड बना दिया, हायर थिंग बना दिया। लेकिन न्यूरमबर्ग कोर्ट ने क्या बताया? लॉ रिक्वायर्स मोरालिटी, विदाउट मोरालिटी इट इज नॉट लॉ एट ऑल, बट दे सेड मिनिमम मोरालिटी। लॉ रिक्वायर्स मिनिमम मोरालिटी। व्हाई? That means they are saying what? Positive law requires minimum natural law. Without that minimum natural law, the existence of positive law will be in danger. That means ये सब रिवाइवल ऑफ नेचुरल लॉ है। रिवाइवल ऑफ नेचुरल लॉ में क्या हुआ? पहले वाला नेचुरल लॉ में आप क्या बताते थे? पहले वाले जब सेंट ऑगस्टाइन, उस समय क्या था? आप कहते थे नैतिकता जिंदगी से भी बढ़कर है, मोरालिटी इज बिगर देन लाइफ, जान जाए वचन ना जाए। अभी रिवाइवल ऑफ नेचुरल लॉ में आप क्या कहेंगे? जिंदगी जीने के लिए कितना नैतिकता चाहिए? नैतिकता जिंदगी से बढ़कर नहीं है। सो मोरालिटी हैज बिकम ओनली इंस्ट्रूमेंटल। दैट टाइम मोरालिटी वाज इंट्रिंसिक। अभी न्यूरमबर्ग कोर्ट ने क्या बताया? मोरालिटी इज इंस्ट्रूमेंटल, नॉट इंट्रिंसिक लाइक इट वाज इन द बिफोर, इन द पास्ट। अभी आप क्या बता रहे हैं? एवरी पॉजिटिव लॉ रिक्वायर्स मिनिमम नेचुरल लॉ। व्हाई? फॉर द सर्वाइवल ऑफ द पॉजिटिव लॉ। पॉजिटिव लॉ का सर्वाइवल के लिए मोरालिटी चाहिए। क्यों? बिकॉज you cannot be perpetually immoral. That is what Hart ने कहा, 5 truisms. 5 truisms Hart ने कुछ बताया, natural limitations. Human beings have natural limitations. So we have to be moral. We cannot be perpetually immoral. Why? Because nature has sent us with so many natural limitations. And so long as we have these natural limitations, we cannot be perpetually immoral. इसका मतलब हम तो moral रहना ही पड़ेगा. Nature has compelled us to be moral. Hart is a positivist. Even then he is accepting morality. Why?
और बिकॉज ही हैज लव फॉर मोरालिटी। वो क्या बता रहा है, बिना मोरालिटी पॉजिटिव लॉ का अस्तित्व खतरा में आ जाएगा। पॉजिटिव लॉ रिक्वायर्स मिनिमम नेचुरल लॉ फॉर इट्स सर्वाइवल, अदरवाइज पॉजिटिव लॉ विल बी इन डेंजर। आई डोंट थिंक आई कैन एक्सप्लेन दैट एनी फर्दर बिकॉज टाइम इज शॉर्ट। इसका मतलब फिर क्या हुआ, नेचुरल लॉ लॉ में फिर आ गया, एवरी लॉ रिक्वायर्स मिनिमम मोरालिटी। तब फुलर आता है। फुलर क्या बताता है, इन्होंने बताया दैट लॉ ऑफ कोर्स हैज एन इनर मोरालिटी। कैसा इनर मोरालिटी, बिकॉज ही सेड दैट देयर इज अ प्रोसीजर टू मेक लॉ। चाय बनाने का एक प्रोसीजर है, कॉफी बनाने का एक प्रोसीजर है, कुर्सी बनाने का एक प्रोसीजर है, लॉ बनाने का एक प्रोसीजर है। तो इन्होंने 8 प्रिंसिपल्स बताया। इस लॉ कैन बी मेड ओनली अकॉर्डिंग टू दिस प्रिंसिपल्स। को कुर्सी बनाने का 2 हाथ चाहिए, 2 पैर चाहिए, एक कुशन चाहिए। उसी ढंग से लॉ को बनाने का भी आपको 8 चीज़ें चाहिए। और 8 चीज़ों में 100% करने का जरूरी नहीं है, 8 चीज़ 100% होना ऐसा जरूरी नहीं है, लेकिन 8 चीज़ तो होना ही पड़ेगा। देन ओनली यू कैन कॉल इट एज ए लॉ, अदरवाइज इट इज नॉट अ लॉ एट ऑल। तो फुलर इज सेइंग व्हाट, फुलर इज सेइंग दैट बेंथम ने क्या कहा, व्हाट इज लॉ इज वन क्वेश्चन, वेदर इट इज गुड लॉ और बैड लॉ इज अनदर क्वेश्चन। तो बेंथम क्या कहेगा, कुर्सी कुर्सी है, कुर्सी कुर्सी है। आप कहेंगे सर बैठने लायक नहीं है, तब भी बेंथम कहेगा कुर्सी है, because to Bentham it is not a good chair, because it is not meant for, comfortable for sitting, but he will call it as a chair, but he will say it is not a good chair. But Fuller क्या कहेगा, it is not at all a chair. वह फुल्लर क्या कहता है, लॉ, what is law is not only a factual question. What is law is not only a factual question. You cannot separate the fact from the value. The facts also require value. The facts also require value. So when you are deciding what is law, you require minimum morality. That is what the Nuremberg court said. फुलर का आर्ग्यूमेंट क्या है, इनर मोरालिटी ऑफ लॉ। दैट मीन्स देयर इज एन आउटर मोरालिटी ऑफ लॉ। आउटर मोरालिटी विल डिसाइड, दैट इज द वर्क ऑफ द लेजिस्लेचर, वी आर नॉट कंसर्न विद दैट। इनर मोरालिटी कंसर्न्स अस। जजेस को इनर मोरालिटी से मतलब है। मोदी जी जो भी फिलॉसफी फॉलो करें वो एक्सटर्नल है। मोदी जी, राहुल गांधी जी, वो जो भी फिलॉसफी, वो हॉल्स लॉल्स का फिलॉसफी फॉलो करें, नॉजिक का फिलॉसफी फॉलो करें, उनका अपना मर्जी है। लेकिन जज का इंपॉर्टेंस भी है। जज क्या कहेगा, मोदी जी आप कानून बना दीजिए, लेकिन कानून बनाने का प्रोसीजरल मोरालिटी है, प्रोसीजरल। वो प्रोसीजर को आपको फॉलो करना ही पड़ेगा। और प्रोसीजर क्या है, ये आठों सिद्धांत को फॉलो करना ही पड़ेगा। तो ये प्रोसीजर नहीं फॉलो करेंगे, वी विल नॉट एक्सेप्ट इट एज लॉ। इसका मतलब लॉ हैज एन इनर मोरालिटी। अब आप क्या कहेंगे, हार्ट ने फुल्लर को क्वेश्चन किया। क्या क्वेश्चन किया, फुल्लर साहब आपका 8 सिद्धांत को जब देखेंगे उसमें नैतिकता क्या है। आपने क्या बताया, लॉ शुड नॉट बी केप्ट सीक्रेट, लॉ शुड बी गिवन प्रोस्पेक्टिव ऑपरेशन, लॉ शुड नॉट बी गिवन रिट्रोस्पेक्टिव ऑपरेशन, लॉ मस्ट बी केपेबल ऑफ बीइंग मेड एनफोर्सेबल। इसमें नैतिकता क्या है आठों सिद्धांत में, दिस विल मेक द लॉ इफेक्टिव। लेकिन इसमें नैतिकता कुछ नहीं है ना, व्हाई डिड यू से इट इज इनर मोरालिटी। They are talking about efficacy of law. So what is morality and what is efficacy? These two are different things. फुल्लर ने क्या बताया, मिस्टर हार्ट आप मुझे बहुत कम समझ रहे हैं, यू आर नॉट अंडरस्टैंडिंग। ही सेड टेक 2 रिजाइम्स, मिस्टर रिजाइम ए, रिजाइम बी। रिजाइम ए में क्या है, वो किसी भी 8 सिद्धांत को फॉलो नहीं करते हैं। दे डोंट मेक एनी फॉलो एनी 8 रूल्स, दे कंप्लीटली आर आर्बिट्ररी एंड दे वायलेट ह्यूमन राइट्स। सेकंड में क्या है, सेकंड में वो आठों सिद्धांत को फॉलो करते हैं। हार्ट क्या कहता है, ये आठों सिद्धांत को फॉलो करने के बावजूद भी अनैतिक काम कर सकते हैं। इसका मतलब आठों सिद्धांत मुझे अनैतिक काम करने से रोक नहीं सकता है ना। मिस्टर फुल्लर सेड, यू सेड इट इज इनर मोरालिटी। Hart is saying what? I will follow all the 8 principles. Even then I can do immoral things. That means the 8 principles which you have given, which you are calling as inner morality, they cannot prevent me from doing immoral things. So why are you calling it as inner morality? फुल्लर क्या बताता है, मिस्टर हार्ट आप समझ नहीं पा रहे। 8 प्रिंसिपल्स क्या है, ये भी आपको इसको इसका माध्यम से भी आप गलत काम कर सकते हैं, लेकिन उतना गलत काम नहीं कर सकते हैं जहां सिद्धांत को फॉलो नहीं करते हैं। इसमें क्या है, रूल ऑफ लॉ है। रूल ऑफ लॉ का मतलब यहाँ द रूल्स आर नॉट केप्ट सीक्रेट। यहाँ भी मानवाधिकार का उल्लंघन होता है, बट पीपल नो व्हाट इज द लॉ। दो देयर ह्यूमन राइट्स आर वायलेटेड, दे नो व्हाट इज द लॉ एंड इट विल बी गिवन प्रोस्पेक्टिव ऑपरेशन, दे विल नॉट बी टेकन बाय सरप्राइज। उनको पता चलता है और बाहर आ सकते हैं, बाहर घूम सकते हैं एक समय तक। इसका मतलब सर्टेनिटी है, जितना समय उनको सर्टेनिटी मिलता है उस समय दे कैन प्लान एंड दे कैन ओवरथ्रो दैट गवर्नमेंट। लेकिन पहले वाले में क्या है, यू नेवर नो व्हेन द लॉ विल बी चेंज, यू आर ऑलवेज टेकन बाय सरप्राइज, लॉज आर मोस्टली केप्ट सीक्रेट, इंट्रोस्पेक्टिव ऑपरेशन। इसका मतलब फुलर का आर्गुमेंट या ऑटो सिद्धांत को फॉलो करेंगे, आप उतना इमोरल काम नहीं कर सकते हैं जितना पहले वाला रिजिम में कर सकते हैं. So Fuller, he wanted to demonstrate to us that the procedural morality is the inner morality of law. तो इस प्रकार से फुल्लर ने क्या किया, फिर हायर लॉ की तरफ, हायर का मतलब क्या है, फिर नैतिकता की तरफ बढ़ना. और एक समय के लोग इसको हायर नहीं मानते हैं, क्योंकि हम लोग बहुत घटिया हो गए आजकल, हम लोग नैतिकता से दूर हो गए हैं, तो नैतिकता को हायर कहते हैं. एक समय लोग क्या बताते थे, लॉ में नैतिकता होना चाहिए तभी वो लॉ है. आजकल हम लोग वी डाइवर्स लॉ फ्रॉम मोरालिटी, वी सेड लॉ कैन एग्जिस्ट इन आइसोलेशन ऑफ मोरालिटी, वी सेड लॉ कैन बी इमोरल. लेकिन क्या हुआ, डॉर्किन ने प्रिंसिपल्स को लेके आया, हार्ट ने कहा लॉ इज रूल्स, अच्छा काम किया, प्लस डिस्क्रेशन. डॉर्किन ने कहा लॉ इज रूल्स प्लस प्रिंसिपल्स, तब आपको फुल्लर आता है, इनर मोरालिटी. अब फुल्लर का टीचर के बारे में बताएंगे. फुल्लर का टीचर रैडब्रूक है. रैडब्रूक इज द टीचर ऑफ फुल्लर. फुल्लर इज द टीचर टू डॉर्किन. लियोन फुल्लर ने क्या किया, वो अमेरिकन है, वो जर्मनी गया. रैडब्रूक इज ए जर्मन, वो हिटलर के कैबिनेट में रैडब्रूक वाज ए मिनिस्टर. ये रैडब्रूक कौन है, जर्मन फिलोसोफर. ही बिलीव्ड इन पॉजिटिविज्म, वो पॉजिटिविज्म को मानते थे, एंड ही थॉट दैट देयर इज नो लॉ हायर देन द स्टेट. मतलब पॉजिटिव लॉ में पॉलिटिकल को इंपॉर्टेंस देते हैं, पॉलिटिकल स्ट्रक्चर स्टेट है, तो इसलिए वो स्टेट से ज़्यादा किसी और कानून को नहीं मानते थे. लेकिन रैडब्रूक ने बाद में अपना विचार बदल दिया मरने के पहले. उन्होंने क्या बताया, इसको आप लोग बहुत ध्यान से सुनना पड़ेगा. रैडब्रूक ने क्या कहा, आप लोग याद करिएगा, सेंट ऑगस्टाइन ने कहा एन अनजस्ट लॉ इज नॉट ए लॉ, एन अनजस्ट लॉ इज नॉट ए लॉ. रैडब्रूक ने क्या कहा, ए हाईली अनजस्ट लॉ इज नॉट ए लॉ. इसका मतलब हाईली अनजस्ट लॉ. क्यों, क्योंकि रैडब्रूक कब आ रहा है, 20वीं सेंचुरी में आ रहा है. अब उस समय नेचुरल लॉ का इंपॉर्टेंस लगभग समाप्त हो गया. सेंट ऑगस्टाइन ने क्या बताया, जब नेचुरल लॉ वाज एट इट्स पीक, तब उन्होंने क्या बताया, जस्टिस इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट इन द लॉ, विदाउट जस्टिस इट इज नॉट अ लॉ एट ऑल. तो पॉजिटिविज्म आया, पॉजिटिविज्म ने क्या बताया, जस्टिस इज नॉट द क्राइटेरिया टू आइडेंटिफाई लॉ, लॉ इज लॉ दो इट इज अनजस्ट. ये पॉजिटिविज्म ने बताया. फिर क्या हुआ, लॉ हार्ट ने नॉर्मेटिव बनाया. फिर डॉर्किन आया, लॉ इज रूल्स प्लस प्रिंसिपल्स कहा. फिर फुल्लर आया, इनर मोरालिटी प्रोसीजरल मोरालिटी बताया. फिर रैडब्रूक आया और क्या बता रहा है, 20वीं सेंचुरी में फुल्लर क्या, रैडब्रूक क्या बता रहा है, ए हाईली अनजस्ट लॉ इज नॉट लॉ. इसका मतलब क्या नतीजा निकलेगा, एन अनजस्ट लॉ इज ए लॉ. वाई इस प्रकार से, बिकॉज वेदर जस्टिस इज अ रैशनल कॉन्सेप्ट और नॉट. अभी आप जस्टिस के लिए जब बात करते हैं, बहुत से लोग जस्टिस को इमोशन कहते हैं. जस्टिस इज ओनली इमोशन, इट इज ओनली अ फीलिंग, इट कैन नॉट बी रैशनली अंडरस्टूड, इट इज नॉट ए रैशनल कॉन्सेप्ट. तब लोगों ने क्या बताया, फिनिस, आपने फिनिस का नाम सुना होगा, ही हैड रिटन ए वंडरफुल बुक नेचुरल लॉ एंड नेचुरल राइट्स. फिनिस इज द फॉलोअर ऑफ अरिस्टोटल, वो अरिस्टोटल का थ्योरी को लेके आ रहे हैं. तो फिनिस ने क्या बताया, भाई साहब आप इस प्रकार से बात कर रहे हैं, लेकिन यूनिवर्सल डिक्लेरेशन ऑफ ह्यूमन राइट्स वो यूनिवर्सल है. लेकिन साइबनी ने क्या बताया, लॉ कैन नेवर बी यूनिवर्सल, लॉ इज ऑलवेज लोकल. So there is no universal understanding of what is right and what is wrong. What is right and what is wrong depends on my culture, on my history, on my geography, environmental factors. So there can be no universal criteria to decide what is right and what is wrong. So universal human rights को अपोज करते हैं. और बहुत से देश में क्या है, they don't follow universal human rights and they commit many atrocities against their own people. जब पूछेंगे आप इतने atrocities क्यों कर रहे हैं, they say what, our culture permits us, our culture is different. And we are a different culture, and according to our culture we don't believe in human rights and we can commit these atrocities. But Finnis क्या कहता है, वो culture did not permit them to commit these atrocities. These people are demagogues. वो नेता अच्छा नहीं है, वो मानवाधिकार का उल्लंघन करके कल्चर का पर्दा में छुपा रहता है. He uses culture as a cloak to commit violations of human rights. No culture permits violations of human. All cultures are, हर कल्चर का, दुनिया में जितना भी कल्चर देखो, कल्चर्स, उसका बेडरॉक मिनिमम होता है. वो बेडरॉक मिनिमम का मतलब उसका निचोड़ होता है. वो निचोड़ क्या है, फिनिस सेज नो कल्चर परमिट्स द इंटेंशनल किलिंग ऑफ अनदर पर्सन. जितना भी कल्चर्स हो दुनिया में, एक कल्चर भी आपको दूसरा इंसान को मर्डर करने का अनुमति नहीं दिया. और किसी भी कल्चर डिड नॉट गिव यू द राइट टू स्लीप विद एनी वुमन ऑफ योर चॉइस. किसी भी लड़की के साथ, वुमेन के साथ आपको सोने का अधिकार नहीं है. You can sleep only with your wife. Some cultures may tell you you can marry 1, 2, 3, 4. But no culture said that you can sleep with any woman of your choice. And no culture permitted incestuous sexual relationships. इसका मतलब हर कल्चर्स में निचोड़ है, और वो निचोड़ क्या है? एवरी ऑब्जेक्टिव आंसर, ऑब्जेक्टिविटी को आप देखेंगे, यू से सर दीज आर सब्जेक्टिव थिंग्स, बट फिटनेस क्या बता रहा है? एवरी मन विल अग्री, एवरी कल्चर अग्रीज दैट कमिटिंग मर्डर इज रॉन्ग, एवरी वन इन द, इसी प्रकार से जस्टिस में भी लोग क्या बताते हैं? हाईली इनजस्टिस काम करेंगे, हाईली इनजस्टिस काम, everyone will say it is wrong, not only me, not only other teachers, not only students, that is an objective answer. तो रैट ब्रूक क्या बता रहा है? ए हाईली अनजस्ट पॉजिटिव लॉ इज नो लॉ एट ऑल। इसका मतलब फिर क्या, मेरा कहने का मतलब, हाउ वी आर, हम लोग नीचे आए हैं, ऊपर गए हैं। तो इस प्रकार से हम जिस नेचुरल लॉ को पहले हम लोग नकार दिए हैं, वी सेड दैट इस प्रकार का लॉ जो है वो लॉ, नेचुरल लॉ, द लॉ विच एग्जिस्ट इन नेचर, ये सब बकवास है, साइंस को समझ में नहीं आता है। लॉ इज फाउंड इन स्टैट्यूट्स, लॉ इज फाउंड इन जजमेंट्स। लेकिन फिर लॉ में प्रिंसिपल्स आ गए। प्रिंसिपल्स आर नॉट पॉजिटिव। Dworkin proved that principles are law. He said principles cannot be identified through empirical test. फिर आपका फुल्लर आया, इनर मोरालिटी के लिए बात किया। इसका मतलब, मेरा कहने का मतलब क्या है? लॉ को आप प्योरली सोशियोलॉजी में भी देखिएगा, when talk law of sociology and sociology of law, उसमें मैक्स वेबर, कार्ल मार्क्स, they thought society must be understood through a different science. Society cannot be understood through the same methods which are used in natural sciences. So there's a difference between nature and society. Society must have a different science. Nature, of course, has a different science. But suppose you want to understand the society through the same methods which are used in natural sciences, it is very difficult to understand. अभी आप लोग कहेंगे तो मैं आगे बढ़ेंगे, एंड आई थिंक दैट समय कितना हो मुझे पता नहीं। सपोज यू वांट मी
Yes,
टू गो। हाँ,
yes, sir. We are a little over time, but
ओके,
the participants are very willing to continue. But we
ओके,
will end after a question and answer session. We have
ओके,
some
ओके,
questions.
बिकॉज मेरे
But the
पास और भी बहुत सी चीज़ें
participants
हैं, यूटिलिटी,
are,
जस्टिस, रोल्स,
yes, sir.
उसमें भी जा सकते हैं। लेकिन नेक्स्ट टाइम इफ यू इन्वाइट मी, इफ यू थिंक आई एम गुड इनफ टू बी इन्वाइटेड।
Yes, yes, yes. So we'll take up questions. Sakshi, over to you.
Yes, sir. So we have some questions. There is Miss Rajiv Ranjan, sir. I am unmuting him. Rajiv Ranjan, sir is asking, validity, certainty, and uniformity in law is more important, or its efficacy in law?
या बट देन यू सी, यू कैन नॉट सेपरेट वैलिडिटी फ्रॉम एफिकेसी। दो हार्ट ने क्या किया, ही सेपरेटेड एफिकेसी फ्रॉम वैलिडिटी। हार्ट ने क्या कहा? सपोज ए लॉ इज मेड इन इंग्लैंड इन द ईयर 1700, that continues to be the law in 2025 also, though the law is not efficacious, which is valid. So that means he is saying that the validity is a normative question, efficacy is a descriptive question. The same thing was said by Kelsen also. Kelsen ने क्या बताया? The norms are valid though they are not effective. मतलब नॉर्म का इफेक्टिवनेस से नॉर्म को आप फॉलो किया नहीं किया उससे कोई मतलब नहीं है। आप क्या कहेंगे? चोर को सजा मिलना चाहिए, लेकिन आंसर क्या है? कि चोर सजा से बच गया क्योंकि जज साहब को रिश्वत दे दिया, पुलिस को डरा दिया। तो केल्सन क्या कहेगा? दैट इज ए एम्पेरिकल क्वेश्चन वेदर ही इज पनिश्ड और नॉट। बट लॉ इज अ नॉर्मेटिव साइंस। केल्सन भी लॉ को नॉर्मेटिव मानता है। केल्सन भी लॉ को डीपोलिटिसाइज्ड इमेज दिया। केल्सन सेड वन ought validates the other ought. The is does not validate the ought. The ought is validated by the higher ought. इसका मतलब is efficacy, ought is the वैलिडिटी। तो कैल्सन क्या बता रहा है? हार्ट जैसा, वन ऑट वैलिडेट्स अदर ऑट। लेकिन फाइनली हार्ट ने भी क्या स्वीकार किया? दो दी लॉ इज वैलिड, दो इट इज नॉट इफेक्टिव, बट द लॉ एज अ होल मस्ट बी इफेक्टिव। कैल्सन ने भी क्या कहा? द सिस्टम ऑफ नॉर्म्स मस्ट बी एज अ होल मस्ट बी मिनिमम इफेक्टिव। इसका मतलब इफेक्टिवनेस को वैलिडिटी से आप एकदम अलग नहीं कर सकते हैं। दो ऑफ कोर्स effective validity and efficacy is not a condition precedent for validity. Law can be valid though it is not effective, that of course we can prove in theory. लेकिन केल्सन को फिर क्या हुआ? जब ग्रहनॉर्म का क्वेश्चन आया, बिकॉज ग्रहनॉर्म इज नॉट ए नॉर्म, दो यू कॉल ग्रहनॉर्म के पीछे कोई और नॉर्म नहीं है। यदि ग्रहनॉर्म के पीछे नॉर्म नहीं होगा तो हाउ इज द ग्रहनॉर्म वैलिड? तो केल्सन को एम्पेरिकल दुनिया में आना ही पड़ा। Kelsen wanted to keep his theory pure, so he did not want to enter into empirical sciences. Empirical sciences are natural sciences, they are concerned with ease. Kelsen ईस्ट का दुनिया में नहीं आना चाहते, वो ऑट का दुनिया में ही रहना चाहते। लेकिन ग्रहनॉर्म की जब सवाल आया तो केल्सन को ऑट का दुनिया से ईस्ट का दुनिया में आना ही पड़ा। दिस इज माय
Sir,
आंसर।
yes, sir, we have more from Tejas Sonaje, sir. He asked, Can the recent happenings in Nepal and France be studied through the jurisprudential lenses of law?
So these are political questions, please, because I just want to avoid. They are
Sure,
not
sir.
legal questions.
Yeah, sir. He also asked difference between law and order and law for order, and which concept make
Law.
law and order and law for order.
देखिए, आप कम्युनिस्ट सोसाइटीज में जाएंगे, कम्युनिस्ट सोसाइटीज में वो लोग क्या बताएंगे, दे डोंट टॉक अबाउट रूल ऑफ लॉ, दे विल से रूल बाय लॉ, क्योंकि वहाँ लॉ, रूल बाय लॉ, रूल ऑफ लॉ में क्या है, लॉ इज मोर फंडामेंटल देन सॉवरेन, इवन द स्टेट इज बाउंड बाय द लॉ, वहाँ रूल ऑफ लॉ कहते हैं। रूल बाय लॉ का मतलब क्या है, लॉ इज ओनली इंस्ट्रूमेंट इन द हैंड्स ऑफ द पॉलिटिकल पावर, दे यूज लॉ टू ब्रिंग अबाउट कम्युनिज्म, दे यूज लॉ टू ब्रिंग अबाउट सोशलिज्म, तो लॉ इज यूज एज अ पर्टिकुलर वेपन और इंस्ट्रूमेंट टू ब्रिंग अबाउट, टू चेंज द सोसाइटी। उसमें मार्क्स ने लॉ को रिवोल्यूशनरी नेचर दिया, मार्क्स हैड नो रेस्पेक्ट फॉर लॉ, कार्ल मार्क्स ने कहा लॉ इज अ सिंफुल इंस्टीट्यूशन, लॉ इज अ डोमिनेटिंग इंस्टीट्यूट, दीज आर डोमिनेटिंग, लॉ इज अ, लॉ एंड स्टेट दे आर इंस्ट्रूमेंट्स ऑफ डोमिनेशन। और कम्युनिज्म आने से क्या होगा, लॉ पेरिश हो जाएगा। लेकिन लॉ का यूजफुलनेस को भी मार्क्स ने स्वीकार किया। लॉ कब तक यूजफुल है, टू ब्रिंग अबाउट द रिवोल्यूशन, प्रोलेटेरिएट रिवोल्यूशन। प्रोलेटेरिएट का मतलब कार्मिक जाके मारेंगे कैपिटलिस्ट को, और इन बिटवीन आपको सोशलिज्म आएगा, तो उस समय भी लॉ का जरूरी है। एंड मार्क्स प्रेडिक्टेड लॉ विल विदर अवे, रूल बाय लॉ चला जाएगा, रूल ऑफ लॉ आ सकता है, लेकिन आज भी रशिया में रूल बाय लॉ ही चल रहा है, रूल ऑफ लॉ नहीं आया।
Sir, we have another question from Sandeep Mane, sir. He asked, is there any theory put forward by any Indian thinker or researchers?
इंडियन थिंकर्स का तो मैं अभी मेरा लेक्चर उस पर है ही नहीं है। अगर इंडियन थिंकर्स में जाएंगे तो ऐसा आपका अनेक महान लोग हैं, जो मेरा पर्सनल ओपिनियन ये है, जो हम जितना भी डिस्कस किए हैं उससे ज़्यादा बहुत अच्छा हमारा पूर्विक ने सोचा है, बहुत अच्छा बताया। और लॉ को व्हाट इज़ राइट एंड व्हाट इज़ रॉन्ग धर्म से जोड़े हैं, जस्टिस से, नैतिकता से। अभी हम लोगों को लॉ कैन बी इमोरल हम लोग डाइजेस्ट नहीं कर पाते हैं। ऑस्टिन ने कहा ये वेस्टर्न जूरिस्प्रूडेंस है, क्योंकि हम लोग लॉ को लॉ एंड ऑर्डर से समझ रहे हैं। लेकिन फिर लॉ को हायर लॉ, हायर लॉ का मतलब लॉ भगवान का रूप है। हमारा जो पूर्विक ने बताया वो बहुत वो होल WHOLE, वो बहुत समग्र रूप में बताया, वसुधैव कुटुंबकम। उनका विचार नेक है। मैं आपको एक चीज़ बताना चाहता हूँ, मेरा ये डिपार्टमेंट में प्रोफेसर सुखपाल सिंह जी करके एक प्रोफेसर थे, वो मुझे बताते थे, वो एक गुरु के अंदर छात्र रहता, मतलब उनका सर का एक गुरु है, और आध्यात्म में बहुत ज़्यादा समय सर रहते थे। उनका गुरु जी बताते थे, आप कुछ भी नया दुनिया को बताना चाहते हो, गुरु जी का परमिशन लेना पड़ेगा। गुरु जी क्या करेगा, वो जो सिद्धांत दुनिया को बताएंगे पहले अपने ऊपर लागू करेंगे, उस सिद्धांत को वो बहुत साल झेलेंगे, और अपने ऊपर लागू करने के बाद जब उनको लगता है सिद्धांत का मानव का कल्याण होगा, तब उस सिद्धांत को वो पब्लिश करने का कहेगा, प्रचलन करो। तब तक वो अपने ऊपर सिद्धांत को अपना छाप। तो इस प्रकार का नेक विचार है। और जहाँ आपका जैसे लॉ इज पॉलिटिकल, पॉलिटिकल का मतलब क्या है, आप कहेंगे लॉ इज द कमांड ऑफ सॉवरेन, दैट मीन्स यू हैव वेरी अल्टीरियर ऑब्जेक्टिव्स which are not that pure, which are not that pious or noble। तो मैं उस लड़का से ये कहेंगे, अभी मैं भी इंडियन जूरिस्प्रूडेंस थोड़ा उस पर पढ़ रहा हूँ, वैसा मेरा उसमें रुचि है, मैं भी पढ़ना शुरू कर दिया हूँ। अगले बार हो सकता है मैं भी इंडियन जूरिस्प्रूडेंस में नारद स्मृति, यज्ञवल्क्य स्मृति, क्योंकि जैसा मेरा डिपार्टमेंट में कुछ टीचर ऑलरेडी पढ़ना शुरू किए हैं, तो मेरा भी रुचि जग रहा है। सो आई एम सॉरी माई डियर स्टूडेंट, आई कैन नॉट आंसर दैट क्वेश्चन बिकॉज माई limitations of my knowledge, but I do understand your concerns। दुनिया को भारत आजकल गुरु बन गया, सब चीज़ भारत मार्गदर्शन कर रही है, वसुधैव कुल। हम लोगों से अमेरिका सब देश सीख रहे हैं। अगर सिखाना है तो हमको अपना प्राचार्य मतलब प्राचीन सभ्यता ये सब को फिर रोशन करना पड़ेगा। आई एग्री विथ यू, थैंक यू। साक्षी तुम्हारा आवाज नहीं आ रहा है।
Yes, sir. Sorry, sir. Sir, we have way many more questions, but I will end with Professor Rajneesh sir's question. He asked, if you are on the seat, you are
प्रोफेसर
the
रजनीश फ्रॉम
sovereign.
BHU,
Yes, sir. He
he
is
is
in
also there।
the meeting, and I have asked him to unmute, but I think sir has
Okay,
been
okay, sure,
lagged.
sure।
Sir's question is, if you are on the seat, you are sovereign. Why are you sovereign? Because the public habitually followed you. But his question is, if public obeyed your order due you pressure or under fear, then you should be considered as sovereign or not.
Public obey me because of fear।
Yes, sir. He asked that if public obeyed the sovereign due to pressure or fear, then should the sovereign be a
I
sovereign
am
or
the
not?
sovereign because Austin is not concerned why you obey me, whether you obey me or not. For what reasons you obey me, Austin is not concerned. That is what made him a fact. That means it's a descriptive science, factual science. So suppose you say that आप मुझे इज्जत देना पड़ेगा तभी ओबे करेंगे तो मैं संप्रभु बनेंगे. Austin is trying to make law a factual science. How did he become the sovereign? Through power. I did not use moral methods. I became immoral में मेरा. लेकिन ऑस्टिन का कहना है who is the sovereign, who ought to be the sovereign, what is desirable, that is not the question, what is the factual thing. So I am the sovereign, that's all. Whatever I command is the law, whether it's a good command or bad command.
Bad command.
So Austin is not concerned with right and wrong. Normative questions से उनको कोई मतलब नहीं है.
Okay, sir. We have many
Thank
more
you, sir.
questions.
Thank you so much.
हाँ
Sir, Rajneesh
Thank
sir
you,
was
Murali sir.
online.
हाँ thank you.
So with this, we bring today's session to close. It is my privilege
Yeah, I
to
can.
propose the vote.
I'll be very glad to answer further questions also. Okay, next time.
Yes, sir, because we are reaching 9.
Uh,
So it is my privilege to express the vote of thanks on the behalf
Okay.
of SNVP Law College and Law Teachers India and all the participants present here. I
Okay, thank you.
extend the heartfelt gratitude to you, sir. Sir has 3 decades of teaching experience, my mistake, as he began as a lecturer at DSR Hindu College, then serving at Andhra University, his alma mater, and later
Okay.
joining Banaras Hindu University, where he rose to the position of professor in 2012 and continues to teach with dedication. We are especially grateful that after a full day of classes, you still guided us, sir, with this energy and clarity on the subject of jurisprudence. I
Thank you.
remember
And then
you
Sakshi, I'm very
introducing
glad to
to.
see you there. Are you doing PhD in Delhi University?
No, sir. I just ended my LLM in 2025, and I will
From
be
Delhi
applying
University.
from PhD. No, sir, from CUSB.
Very
Central.
good. Congratulations. I'm very glad to see you back. And then God bless you.
Thank you, sir. Thank
And
you,
then
sir.
I just
Thank
want
you.
to tell the audience that Sakshi was a very good student, very punctual, very regular, very obedient.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. Sir, she's with in no with me like as a team member and contributed significantly last 4 years in Pro Bono India Law Teachers. Many things
Sakshi
she
ने
has done. Yeah, yes, sir. So
हाँ वो बहुत अच्छा छात्र है.
and the Shalendra sir is there. So thank you very much, Shalendra sir, for suggesting Murali sir's name for this particular program, sir. Thanks.
So we can unmute now, sir?
Yes.
अरे
Yes, sir.
नहीं.
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank
fine.
you.
Thank
Okay,
you.
sir.
Thank you.
Good day, sir.